This is going to sound weird, but bear with me. Back in high school, there was this kid who told everyone he was a demon. I still don't feel comfortable writing his real name for reasons you'll understand soon. So, I'll just call him Patrick, even though his actual name sounded like something out of a Shakespeare play. Patrick was off, socially awkward in a way that made even teachers uneasy. He had this vacant, lifeless stare, and wore the same plain gray hoodie every single day. I'm not exaggerating. I don't think he ever washed it, because he always smelled awful. He was short and average looking, but you'd hardly notice, because he always had his hood up and never took off his sunglasses, even indoors. Eventually, teachers gave up asking him to. Here's where it gets weird. Patrick didn't have any friends, but he had this strange habit of adopting people. If he liked you, which he could decide completely at random, he'd walk up and say, "You're adopted." That apparently meant you were part of his circle, and according to him, protected. Protected from what? We never really knew. He didn't adopt many people, but I was one of them. Looking back, I think it was because he had a crush on me. None of us believed the demon thing. We just figured he was a troubled kid, which he definitely was. Oh, and for context, this all took place in Wayne, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. Another girl he adopted was Gabby, a friend of mine at the time. His crush on her was way more obvious, and all our friends knew it. One day, me, Gabby, Laura, and Luke were hanging out on the dugouts behind the school, killing time. At some point, the conversation drifted to Patrick and his thing for Gabby. We were all laughing about it, and Gabby was visibly embarrassed. Can't remember what nickname we usually used in place of Patrick's real name. It was too clunky. But that day, I distinctly remember Laura saying his actual name the third time she said it. I swear on my life. Patrick jumped up onto the dugout with a baseball bat in his hand. He hadn't been there a second before. It wasn't scary in a normal way. It was terrifying because it felt wrong. We froze. He didn't say anything, just stared. I gave him a nervous little wave. He nodded at me, then jumped down and walked away without a word. When we were sure he was gone, we all burst out laughing, nervous laughter mostly. But inside, I was still shaken. The next time it happened, it wasn't funny at all. I was at Laura's house, just the two of us, hanging out in her room. Her parents were home. I don't remember what we were talking about, but again, Patrick's name came up 3 times. Not 10 minutes later, we heard the front door slam. We assumed maybe one of Laura's many friends had dropped by. Her house was that kind of place. But when we got downstairs, Laura's mom had already answered the door. And there he was, Patrick, just standing there, talking to her mom. She asked why he was there, and his response, "I was summoned." Laura's mom made polite small talk, then gently asked him to leave. He nodded and walked off. Now, the only reason this didn't set off a full-blown panic was that Laura's mom actually knew Patrick and pitied him. But Laura and we were shook. As we walked back upstairs, we looked at each other with horrified expressions. And that's when it clicked. He had shown up right after his name was said, 3 times. We told our friends the next day and made a pact. Never say his name 3 times in a conversation. It worked for a while. Things quieted down. I started to think maybe we'd overreacted, until we were hanging out at our friend Johnny's house. Same group. Me, Gabby, Laura, Luke, and Johnny. The topic shifted to Patrick again. We warned Johnny about the whole say his name 3 times thing, but he didn't buy it, even after the others backed me up. To prove his point, he mockingly said Patrick's name 3 times in one sentence. Nothing happened. At first, he smirked, called us gullible. Then, minutes later, Patrick jumped over the fence into Johnny's backyard. Johnny stopped mid-sentence. We all went dead silent. Patrick just stared. After a moment, he turned and jumped back over the fence. Johnny freaked out. He accused us of setting it up somehow. We told him we begged him not to do it. He didn't say much after that, just told everyone to go home. He was clearly rattled. But the last time was different. A few months later, I was home alone for once. Rare, because my parents never really went out. I invited a guy over. He was kind of a tool, but so were most of the guys I liked back then. We were in my room, and it had just started raining outside. At some point, Patrick came up. I visibly cringed. The guy noticed and asked why, so I told him the whole story. He laughed, and to scare me, he screamed Patrick's name 3 times at the top of his lungs. The moment he finished, the rain outside immediately intensified. Lightning flashed, thunder boomed. I freaked. He apologized, saying it was a crazy coincidence. Then I looked out the window and saw someone standing in the driveway, staring up at my window. I couldn't see clearly through the storm, but I was almost positive it was Patrick. I shut the blinds and ran downstairs, locking every door. I peeked out the front window, and there he was again, standing perfectly still in the middle of my yard. Panic set in. I started screaming, I'm adopted. I'm adopted. Over and over. I knew it didn't make sense. I knew he couldn't hear me, but my brain was in full meltdown. The guy ran downstairs and tried to calm me down. I looked again. Patrick was gone. The storm still raged, but I wasn't about to go looking for him. The next morning, after the guy had left, I went to check the yard. In the far corner, I found Patrick's hoodie. The hoodie, and inside it were a few of my belongings I thought I'd lost. Random little things, like they'd been taken. I was terrified. I didn't call the police. I figured I'd wait and show my parents when they got home. But I never needed to. Patrick didn't show up to school the next day, or the day after, or ever again. No one ever saw him again. No one knew what happened. My parents still live in that house. I think about it a lot. This isn't your typical scary story. I know how it sounds. Some people from school said they caught Patrick hiding nearby, listening to conversations. Maybe that explains how he always showed up right after his name was said. Looking back, I think the simplest explanation is probably the truest. Patrick was a mentally ill stalker, someone who followed me and maybe others around. Still, it makes my skin crawl thinking about him watching, listening, always near, and I don't even want to imagine where he is now. This happened a few years ago in Denver. My friend Mike and I were heading to a dinner party one snowy Saturday evening. We decided to stop at a liquor store before heading to the party. It was honestly a pretty annoying detour with the snow coming down, but we didn't want to show up completely empty-handed. We picked out some local craft beers and a bottle of whiskey and made our way back to the car. I remember the snow starting to pick up around then, but it was nothing we weren't used to. Mike ran back into the liquor store to grab a pack of Zins, his latest nicotine fixation. I was annoyed because I was the one driving, and I didn't have the best car for the snow. After a few minutes, he emerged from the store and hopped into the car. I immediately pulled out of the parking lot, and we were back on our way. The snow was falling even heavier now, covering the roads in a thick blanket of white. The drive to the party was supposed to be straightforward, about 20 to 30 minutes, through familiar suburban neighborhoods. Things in my life are never as easy as they seem, though. The snowstorm had other plans, turning what should have been a relaxing route into a treacherous journey. Let me just say, I'm not a great driver as it is, and the car slipping every 10 seconds didn't help matters. After a tense few minutes, driving uphill, I turned a corner and was met with a sight no one ever wants to see. In the middle of the street was a stopped car. Its hazards were flashing ominously, cutting through the falling snow like distress signals. Both the driver's and passenger side doors were wide open. I was tempted to just drive around it and keep going, but Mike told me to stop. Judge me if you want, but I'm not your typical Good Samaritan. I've been through way too much BS in my life, and it's made me pretty distrusting of strangers. I told him we were already late, but he urged me again, sounding genuinely concerned. Mike had gotten me into trouble before with his childlike curiosity, but this time felt different. Someone could be in real trouble. Reluctantly, I stopped the car. We sat in silence for a few seconds, just watching the scene. Mike asked if we were going to actually check it out, to which I responded, "We are checking it out." He rolled his eyes and said, "Watching it through the windshield isn't going to accomplish anything." He was kind of right, but I really didn't want to get out of the car. I asked if we could wait just a few more minutes. He reluctantly agreed. We kept watching the eerie blinking of the hazards against what was otherwise a beautiful snowy backdrop. Nothing happened, which surprised me. Eventually, Mike said he'd had enough and was going to investigate. Before I could stop him, he stepped out of the car. I watched with rising anxiety as he approached the vehicle. As he did, I could have sworn I saw something dark move out of the corner of my eye. Maybe it was just my nerves playing tricks on me, but the situation was starting to feel worse by the second. Not even 10 seconds later, I thought I saw the car jolt, like something had moved in the trunk or the back seat. Again, maybe I was imagining things, but I didn't care. I slammed my hand on the horn, startling Mike, who had been peeking inside. He immediately understood what I was trying to communicate and sprinted back to the car. I hit the gas the second his door shut and told him I thought it was a trap. He was pretty annoyed when I admitted I didn't have any real proof, but I told him firmly that I wasn't going to risk my life when someone in trouble could just as easily call 911. The rest of the drive was tense. Mike's the kind of guy who holds a grudge longer than most. But we eventually made it to the party, and things finally felt normal again. We spent several hours there, had dinner, and caught up with old friends. The earlier incident was almost entirely forgotten. That was until our host turned on the TV to give some departing guests an update on the storm. He flipped over to the local news, and what I saw next was actually horrifying. Police were issuing reports of a stolen vehicle that had been jacked. Not even 2 hours earlier, the victim had given a spoken account of what happened. She was driving her teenage son home from a friend's house when she saw a car in the road, hazards on, doors open, just like we had. She and her son approached the vehicle to see if someone needed help, and that's when 2 men jumped out from behind a nearby snowbank. Another man emerged from the trunk. They held the woman at gunpoint, took her keys, and drove off, not only in her car, but also in the one they'd used as bait. I stared at Mike with a look of pure fear. That could have been us. We told the rest of the party what happened earlier, and the story definitely killed the vibe for a while, but people were eating it up. To this day, I think about how close we came to getting caught in that trap. The worst part, I'm even more distrusting of strangers than I already was, and I often wonder how many people I would have helped if I hadn't learned just how calculated some setups can be. The series of events I'm about to recount happened over 30 years ago, during my early childhood. Forgive me if some of the details are shaky, but I'll try to remember as much as possible. I was around 10 years old. My extended family was massive, so much so that at that age, it was hard for me to remember the faces of all my relatives, let alone their names. At every family gathering, I was introduced to someone whose face I didn't recognize, even though they all seemed to recognize me. My dad was one of 9 children, so I had 8 sets of aunts and uncles on his side alone. My grandparents on that side were extremely well off and owned a massive beachfront property, which was communal among my dad and his siblings. I don't know the exact dimensions, but I'm pretty sure it could sleep over 30 people. Because of that, my family would often spend large portions of the summer down there. Both my parents had jobs that allowed them to either work remotely or take extended time away from the office. My dad's siblings and their families did the same. There was rarely a time when it was just our family at the beach house. I got along with all my cousins and preferred spending time there rather than at home. I was actually closer with some of my cousins than any of my hometown friends. I liked a lot of my aunts and uncles too, but my favorite by far was Uncle Joseph, who was the father of my cousin Brandon. Brandon was honestly kind of antisocial, so we didn't really play much together. Uncle Joseph, though, he was awesome. He always knew how to brighten my mood or make me laugh. In addition to being great with kids, he was a licensed therapist and psychiatrist. He was often the person I turned to in times of need. There's a decent chance he knew more about me than my own parents did. I confided in him regularly. There was nothing I felt uncomfortable telling him. That summer, I began having tremendously graphic and disturbing nightmares. As far as I can recall, there weren't any common themes between them. They were just psychologically exhausting. Dreams about a family member dying, being abandoned, being alone forever, things like that. I wish I could remember more specifics, but I've long since purged most of those horrors from my mind. I do remember one dream vividly, though. It was one of those false awakening dreams. I woke up and went downstairs to meet my parents for breakfast like on a normal morning. But when I got downstairs, they weren't in the kitchen, and there was no food on the table. I ran back upstairs and barged into my parents' room, then my siblings. But no one was there. The rest of the dream was just me crying on my bedroom floor, wondering why everyone had abandoned me. After 3 or 4 nights of that kind of nightmare, I decided to tell Uncle Joseph. I was too embarrassed to tell my parents. He listened with a concerned look as I described what I'd been experiencing. He even pulled out a little notebook and started writing things down. He told me I needed to do some meaningful internal self-reflection, that something was clawing at my subconscious. I remember thinking, what kind of self-reflection is a 10-year-old supposed to do? But I trusted him. He told me to come back if the nightmares continued. Of course, they did. A few days and more nightmares later, I gave Uncle Joseph an update. He told me he'd been thinking about the situation and believed he had figured out what was going on in my brain. He said that even though I didn't realize it, I was deeply frustrated with my parents and was harboring some unresolved resentment toward them. I was more confused than I'd ever been. I was nothing if not a polite, grateful kid. I had always listened to my parents and loved them more than anything. But Uncle Joseph was a therapist after all. I assumed he'd dealt with situations like mine before and considered myself lucky that he was helping me. I asked him how to deal with it and told him this newfound knowledge scared me. He told me that was perfectly normal. Even his adult patients reacted the same way. He also said it was normal for me to disagree with what he was saying. Dreaming, he explained, implies a subconscious feeling that the brain refuses to accept. That part sort of made sense to me. He told me that over the next few days I should try being a little more disobedient with my parents. He suggested saying no more often and arguing a bit when I didn't get my way. So that's what I did. For 3 days after our conversation, I behaved so uncharacteristically that my parents actually got concerned. They told me they didn't like my recent behavior and warned me to knock it off. It crushed me to act like that, but I was desperate to stop the nightmares. I would have done anything at that age to get them to stop, but they didn't. They got worse, more vivid, more graphic, more disturbing. I confided in Uncle Joseph again. He told me there was one more thing we could try. I begged him to tell me what it was, but he seemed hesitant. After several minutes of pleading, he finally told me. He said my brain was too mature for my young body, and that I needed to set it free. Obviously, I had no idea what that meant. I asked him to explain, but he told me that if I had one more nightmare, he'd tell me what to do. That night, I went to bed terrified. I didn't want to set my body free, even if I didn't understand what he meant. That night, something strange happened. I actually woke up before having a nightmare. In all the days this had been going on, that had never happened before. But for some reason, I was scared to move, scared to breathe loudly. It wasn't sleep paralysis. I could move, but I felt completely paralyzed by fear. I stared at the wall for what felt like a full minute, unsure of what was happening. Then I heard it, a whisper, right next to my ear. It was Uncle Joseph. I was sure of it. I turned over and screamed, sending him stumbling backward. He quickly left the room and shut the door. I sat there in a cold sweat, not even sure if I was awake or still dreaming. Instead of going back to sleep, I ran to my parents' room and told them everything. The nightmares, Uncle Joseph, all of it. My dad didn't hesitate. He stormed into Uncle Joseph's room and confronted him. Uncle Joseph, of course, denied everything. But my dad was a big guy and didn't buy his BS. A fight broke out, and during the scuffle, my dad snatched the satchel Uncle Joseph always carried with him. Uncle Joseph gathered up his things and ran to his car. My dad started going through the satchel, and what he found was sickening. There were pages and pages of nightmare-related notes, both handwritten and printed, articles about inducing dreams, specifically nightmares, personal notes, experiment logs, techniques, previous data. It was horrific. Uncle Joseph was eventually arrested after police found even more disturbing things on his computer. I'm not going to go into full detail, but you can probably piece together what they found, especially considering what he meant by setting my body free. I never saw him again. I don't know what happened to him long term. My parents never talked about the situation around me. Sometimes I kick myself for being so naive, but I was 10. There's nothing I could have done differently.